You can't reach an avoidant heart by running after it. The more you chase, the more you teach that person you'll always close the distance they create, and that's how emotional imbalance begins. The truth is, the key to connecting with someone who pulls away isn't pursuit, it's presence. It's standing still in your worth when everything in you wants to prove it. When someone is avoidant, emotionally distant, inconsistent, or uncomfortable with closeness, your instinct might be to fix it. You start over-explaining, over-giving, or overanalyzing every text. You think, if I just show them how patient, loyal, and loving I am, they'll finally open up. But that never works. Because love that needs to be chased quickly turns into fear, fear of losing, fear of not being enough, fear of being alone. You can't change an avoidant heart by convincing it that you're safe. You show that by being safe with yourself. When you stop trying to force connection and instead create emotional safety through calm consistency, you invite them to meet you halfway. Not because they're suddenly ready, but because they sense you're not a threat to their space. You're someone who values connection but doesn't beg for it. Here's the paradox: avoidant people don't need more pressure, they need more peace. They move away when things feel too intense, but they draw closer when things feel grounded. When you stay calm instead of reactive, kind instead of needy, direct instead of dramatic, you become a mirror of emotional security. You're showing, I don't need you to be close to feel complete, but I welcome you when you are. That's the secret. You reach an avoidant heart not by chasing, but by being the still point they can return to, by showing that love can be calm, steady, and without expectation. You teach them that intimacy doesn't have to cost freedom, and that closeness can feel like peace, not pressure. So instead of asking, how do I make them open up? Ask, how do I stay open without losing myself? Because the person who learns to stay open even when someone else closes off is the one who always wins in love. That's the person who doesn't just attract connection, they create it. When you master this balance of compassion without self-abandonment, care without chasing, you no longer fear distance. You understand that real connection doesn't come from pursuit. It comes from two people who choose each other freely, not one person convincing the other to stay. And when that happens, love stops feeling like a battle. It starts feeling like home. Presence over pursuit is the art of choosing self-respect over reaction. When someone pulls away or becomes emotionally distant, the instinct for many people is to fill that space, to reach out, to fix, to prove, to chase. But that instinct often comes from fear, not love. It comes from the panic of losing connection, not the calm confidence of knowing your worth. Presence, on the other hand, is the quiet power that says, I can stay centered, even when someone else steps back. It's not about ignoring, punishing, or pretending you don't care. It's about choosing not to abandon yourself in the process of trying to keep someone else close. When you chase someone who's pulling away, what you're really saying without words is, your withdrawal determines my peace. Every text you send after they've gone silent, every effort to make them feel comfortable at the expense of your own comfort, teaches them that their distance controls your behavior, and that dynamic kills attraction and safety. Nobody feels drawn to someone who seems desperate for validation, and nobody feels safe with someone who can't sit in stillness. Presence, in contrast, communicates security. It says, I value connection, but I also value myself. When you embody that energy, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to get attention, but because you don't need to. Emotional presence is not passive, it's powerful. It's the decision to remain open and warm while respecting boundaries, yours and theirs. It's a steady, grounded state that says, I am here if you want to meet me, but I won't chase you into the dark. You stop overfunctioning in relationships. You stop taking responsibility for both people's emotions. You begin to understand that love is a two-way street, and walking it alone is just exhaustion disguised as effort. When you stay present instead of pursuing, You give the other person the freedom to choose, and that's the only way real connection can exist, through choice, not pressure. There's also a deeper layer to presence. It forces you to face your own discomfort. Chasing distracts you from the silence, from the insecurity that whispers, "What if they don't care?" Presence makes you sit with that voice until it loses its power. It reminds you that your value doesn't depend on someone else's availability. In that stillness, you begin to trust yourself again. You realize that you can handle distance without losing your center. And from that place of strength, you can show up for love not as someone begging to be seen, but as someone already whole. Presence over pursuit doesn't mean withholding affection or acting indifferent. It means showing care from a place of confidence, not fear. It means allowing someone to come toward you on their own terms while you stay grounded in yours. When you embody presence, you're no longer chasing validation, you're creating gravity. You become the calm in the storm, the safe energy others naturally gravitate toward, because peace is magnetic in a world full of noise. Calm creates safety because emotional peace is the foundation on which trust is built. When someone has an avoidant nature, closeness can often feel like a threat rather than comfort. They might associate intimacy with losing freedom or being overwhelmed. If you meet that fear with pressure, with intensity, or with attempts to pull them closer, they will instinctively retreat. But when you approach them with calm energy, patient, grounded, and non-reactive, you show them that connection doesn't have to come with chaos. You show them that being close to you won't cost their peace. Calmness isn't about silence or suppression. It's about emotional regulation. It's about being aware of your own triggers and choosing to respond with stability instead of urgency. When an avoidant person withdraws or becomes inconsistent, it's easy to take it personally and spiral into anxiety. You start thinking, "What did I do wrong?" Or "How do I get them to talk to me again?" That anxiety translates into behavior over-texting, over-explaining, over-analyzing. But that energy communicates tension, not trust. It tells the other person that you can't handle emotional space. Calm, on the other hand, communicates confidence. It says, "I care, but I won't collapse." That message is disarming to someone who fears closeness. It shows maturity and self-control, two qualities that make emotional safety possible. To create safety through calm, you have to become emotionally self-sufficient. You can't rely on someone else's response to determine your emotional state. That means learning how to self-soothe, to comfort your own worries without demanding instant reassurance. When you can manage your feelings with grace, you create an atmosphere where others can breathe. Avoidant people often crave that kind of emotional environment, one that feels steady rather than smothering. They need to sense that they can come close without being consumed, and calmness offers exactly that. There's also a deeper beauty to this kind of peace. It invites reciprocity. When you stay calm, you model the very behavior you want to receive. You show what it looks like to handle emotional tension without drama. And slowly, that energy begins to influence the other person. They start to feel safer in your presence. Because your emotions don't demand control, they inspire trust. You become a space of quiet acceptance, not a storm of need. That's when real connection begins, when two people can be themselves without fear of judgment or overreaction. Calm creates safety because it tells the other person, "You can be yourself here. You don't need to perform or hide. I won't chase you, and I won't punish you for needing space." That is the essence of emotional maturity, to hold space for both closeness and independence. It's the kind of energy that heals rather than pressures, that invites rather than demands. And when someone who's used to running finally feels safe enough to stay, it's not because you convinced them. It's because your calm gave them something they didn't even know they needed: peace. Overgiving to be chosen is one of the quietest ways we lose ourselves in relationships. It often begins with good intentions, a desire to show care, loyalty, and love, but somewhere along the way, it turns into a performance for approval. When someone is emotionally distant or inconsistent, you start believing that if you just give more, love harder, or prove your worth louder, they'll finally see you and choose you. But love that needs to be earned through overgiving is not love, it's negotiation. And the moment affection becomes something you have to bargain for, you start abandoning yourself in the process. The need to overgive usually comes from fear, the fear of being rejected, unseen, or replaced. You tell yourself that giving more will make you indispensable. You stay available even when they disappear. You forgive before they apologize, and you keep investing even when the emotional return is zero. But what that really teaches the other person is that your boundaries are flexible and your self-worth is negotiable. Instead of inspiring respect, it breeds complacency. People start taking without realizing the cost, and you start shrinking, hoping the sacrifice will finally be enough. But it never is, because genuine connection can't grow from imbalance. True connection happens when both people bring energy, effort, and emotional presence to the table. Overgiving creates an illusion of closeness, but it's one-sided, a performance of love rather than a partnership. When you constantly fill the silence, fix the distance, or chase reassurance, you don't leave room for the other person to step up. They don't have to work for your affection because you're already doing the work for both of you. Over time, that dynamic erodes attraction and mutual respect. People value what they invest in. If you do all the emotional labor, they never have the opportunity to value the connection because they never had to contribute to it. Choosing not to overgive doesn't mean withholding affection or playing games. It means giving from fullness, not emptiness. It's showing love without losing boundaries. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that your presence is already a gift. You don't have to decorate it with constant effort to make it worthy. When you stop chasing validation through overgiving, you make space for authentic reciprocity. You give others the chance to show up for you, to earn your trust, and to meet you emotionally where you are. The moment you realize that your value doesn't depend on how much you do for someone, everything shifts. You begin to see that love isn't proven through effort, it's revealed through consistency and mutual care. When you give from peace instead of fear, your energy changes, it becomes calm, inviting, and grounded. You stop seeking to be chosen because you already choose yourself. And that energy, that quiet self-assurance, is far more powerful than any amount of overgiving. It tells the world, I am already enough, and I will no longer trade my worth for attention. Balancing care with boundaries is one of the most essential skills in building healthy, lasting relationships. It's easy to believe that love means giving endlessly, always being available, and constantly proving your devotion. But genuine care without boundaries becomes self-abandonment, and self-abandonment can never build authentic connection. The most powerful love comes from a place of strength, from someone who knows how to be fully present without losing themselves in another person. True connection doesn't demand that you shrink to fit someone else's comfort. It asks you to stand tall in your truth while holding space for theirs. When you love someone who is emotionally guarded or inconsistent, your empathy might drive you to understand their pain, to be patient with their fears, to show that you're safe. That's compassion. But when your compassion turns into tolerance for disrespect, neglect, or constant emotional distance, that's not love, that's self-sacrifice. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cold. It makes your love cleaner, clearer, and more sustainable. Boundaries communicate that while your heart is open, your self-respect is non-negotiable. You're saying, I can love you deeply, but not at the expense of my peace. Balancing care and boundaries also requires emotional awareness. It's about recognizing the line between helping and fixing, between supporting and rescuing. When you start taking responsibility for someone else's emotional growth, you're crossing into territory that isn't yours. You can inspire, but you can't repair another person's wounds for them. You can offer kindness, but you can't trade your stability for their chaos. Love doesn't mean losing yourself in someone else's healing process. It means walking beside them while staying anchored in your own. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors with clear locks. They don't shut people out, they show people how to come in respectfully. They teach others how to treat you not through ultimatums, but through example. When you calmly state what you will and won't accept, you create safety for both sides. The avoidant person learns that connection doesn't equal control, and you learn that closeness doesn't require self-erasure. That's when love becomes balanced, when it's no longer about clinging or retreating, but about meeting in the middle from a place of mutual respect. The beauty of balancing care with boundaries is that it keeps your love intentional. You give because you choose to, not because you're afraid not to. You stay connected while protecting your emotional space. You speak truth without guilt and listen without absorbing every feeling that isn't yours. That balance turns your love into something powerful, grounded, secure, and inspiring. It's not a love that begs or demands. It's a love that stands calmly and confidently. And in that stance, you stop trying to convince anyone to stay. You understand that real love thrives where both people feel free, respected, and seen, not where one person gives everything just to feel enough. Letting love feel like freedom is one of the highest forms of emotional maturity. It means understanding that connection and independence are not opposites. They are partners in balance. When love feels like peace instead of pressure, it allows both people to breathe, to grow, and to choose each other willingly. Too often, relationships turn into emotional tug-of-wars, one person chasing closeness while the other pulls away for air. That dynamic isn't love, it's control disguised as care. Real love doesn't demand possession. It doesn't insist, "Stay with me or I'll fall apart." Instead, it whispers, "I want you here, but you are free to go." Because when love is rooted in freedom, it becomes a choice renewed every day, not a cage built from fear. An avoidant heart, especially, needs to know that love won't take away its autonomy. The more someone feels they'll lose themselves in closeness, the more they resist it. That's why trying to hold them tighter never works. They interpret it as suffocation, not affection. When you offer freedom instead, emotional space, understanding, and non-reactive support, you show them that connection doesn't have to mean control. You prove that they can stay themselves while being close to you. That's when true intimacy begins to form, when both people feel safe to be who they are without fear of losing themselves in the process. Freedom in love is not detachment, it's trust. It's the confidence that you don't need to monitor, chase, or control someone to feel secure. It's the peace that comes from knowing your worth and trusting that what's meant for you won't need to be forced. That kind of security allows relationships to grow naturally without the weight of constant reassurance or fear-driven behavior. When you love freely, you give the other person the gift of choice, and that's the only way love can stay pure. Anything that removes choice also removes authenticity. To let love feel like freedom, you must first feel free within yourself. You can't expect another person to offer you emotional safety if you haven't built it internally. That means cultivating a sense of wholeness that doesn't depend on anyone's presence or approval. When you're emotionally grounded, you don't chase, you invite. You don't demand, you inspire. Your love becomes a soft place to land rather than a set of expectations to live up to. That's the kind of energy that disarms avoidance and draws people closer naturally. When love feels like freedom, it no longer feeds on fear or dependency. It thrives on respect, choice, and emotional peace. It becomes something steady, not frantic, something that expands, not constricts. It's the realization that closeness isn't about holding someone tight, but holding them true. You stop trying to own love, and instead, you experience it fully, openly, without resistance. Because the most powerful love stories aren't written in pursuit or possession. They're written in presence and permission, two people choosing each other, not because they have to, but because they want to. In the end, reaching an avoidant heart without chasing is not about changing someone else, but about transforming how you love with calm, confidence, and clarity. It's about knowing your worth so deeply that you can offer love without losing yourself, give space without growing cold, and stay open without fear. When you master that balance, love stops being a pursuit and becomes a peaceful meeting of two whole people who choose each other freely. Thank you all for listening with such open hearts. May you go forward not chasing love, but becoming the kind of peace that love naturally finds.